Nothing in this podcast or on our website should be construed as medical advice. Consult your healthcare provider for your individual nutritional and medical needs. The information presented is based on our research and is strictly that of the author and not necessarily those of any professional group or other individual.
Hi, I'm Sue Becker from Bread Beckers. Welcome to Sue's Healthy Minutes. I'm so excited you've joined me today, and I hope this episode encourages you and allows you to find the answers you have been praying for the health of you and your family. Today on Sue's Healthy Minutes, we have another amazing It's the Bread story. It's been a very busy few weeks for me as I prepared and traveled to Texas for a speaking tour. I covered about 2,000 miles in 10 days, sharing the only real bread is the Staff of Life presentation in 6 different cities. It was an amazing trip. I met so many wonderful people, and my guest today is actually one of them. The day before I was preparing to leave for Texas, I shared with a customer at Bread Beckers where I was headed. She then asked me if I had ever heard of a lady by the name of Michal Grappe from Texas. I replied that I had not, as at that point, I had no idea that I had actually met Michal before. During my first few days in Texas, I kept thinking that I should look this lady up in case by any chance she lived in one of the cities I was going to speak in. Well, in my second stop in Dalhart, Texas, I actually asked my host if they had heard of her. They replied, "Oh, yes, and she has quite a testimony." They then told me that she was from Lubbock, Texas, which was my next stop. Well, I knew then that I had to reach out to Michal and hopefully meet her. When I did, this is the funny part, she sent me a picture of the two of us together in my Bread Becker's kitchen. She and her mother had actually come all the way from Texas to a Christmas class a few years ago at Bread Beckers, and she got a picture with me. So though I had met her before, I did not know it and certainly did not know her story. So I reached out. We arranged, but only had a brief moment to meet in Lubbock just before I went on to speak. So we didn't get to talk much as I had hoped, but I heard enough about her healing journey that I knew I wanted her to share her story with you all. So today, it is my pleasure to introduce to you all Michal Grappe. So Michal, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy life to talk to me. Why don't you just introduce yourself a little and tell a little about yourself and your family? I know you're a busy mom because you had your youngest, I believe, when we met in Lubbock with you.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. So I am actually from a small town in West Texas and grew up in West Texas my whole life and married a farmer, and we have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and an almost 6-month-old. We do a hybrid style of education, so I like homeschool my kids, sort of.
Yeah.
Part-time, they go to school a few days a week, and then we homeschool a few days a week. And then we're just busy with sports and their activities and all of the family things, that keep you running out the door.
Yes, I can identify with that. So, and it was just so good. I think you told me when you met me at Veritas that you said, well, I'm dropping 2 of my kids off, I think for sports or something. And
Yes.
you had your little 6-month-old with you. And we got to hug and talk for just a minute, but not nearly enough.
Oh, yes.
You've had 2 very significant health and healing journeys in the past, 12 years?
13. Yeah, 13
years. And I love it. Being a Texas girl, I read on your website, you appropriately call these your 2 rodeos. So why don't we start with your first rodeo? Tell us about that. What symptoms led to this diagnosis?
Well, I think a rodeo is the appropriate way to describe everything that happened because, you just sort of get thrown on the back of a bucking bull and you're just hanging on for dear life trying to figure out what in the world is going on. It was 13 years ago, and I was working on a second degree at a university, and had been married a few years, and I had gotten Guillain Barre Syndrome, which is a autoimmune disease of your peripheral nervous system. So everything that your body does automatically without your awareness. So breathing, digesting, heart rate, blood pressure, everything that your body just does on its own is affected by this disease process. So the first symptom that I had was I'd had a very high fever for a few days that was unresponsive to any sort of fever reducer. And there wasn't really a presence of an infection at the same time. And I was short of breath, and I had pain in my legs, and my gait changed. So I had lost feeling in my feet, and it was pretty rapid over the period of a week and a half, 2 weeks. And I was having very high heart rates, low oxygen saturations, and again, without the presence of any sort of infection. And so I was in and out of doctor's offices, and then ultimately admitted, where they just sort of waited for me to get bad enough to possibly intubate me, because with Guillain Barre syndrome, usually the disease progresses enough to where your lungs are so affected that you can no longer breathe on your own.
Oh my goodness. And do they know what causes it or what brings it on? Do you know?
So, yes, there are a few different things that can cause it. It can be like a terrible viral infection. There is some connection to bacterial infections. I had neither of those. And then the other way you can get it is, which kind of opens a can of worms, is from a vaccine. And so I had actually had a vaccine previous to this.
Yeah.
Very close timeline to this. So they were just going to let me ride that out. So they were just watching me every day and kind of waiting for things to get worse, and it didn't. And so total, like, I was in and out of the hospital, in and out of doctor's offices. I was in school at the time, I was in college, and I had missed about 6 weeks of school. Like, I hadn't been in class. And so my friends were coming up to the hospital and bringing me my notes. I was still taking my quizzes on my computer. Like, I was still trying to keep up with all of my coursework at the time. And they finally they discharged me because they were like, "You're stable enough. We don't really have any way to help you here anymore. So if it gets worse, come back, but you're going to follow up with a neurologist outpatient." So I left the hospital. I didn't feel very comforted by any of that.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So I went home and I saw a neurologist, and he started me on, they're called IVIG treatments. And so, they don't really know how the IVIG works, other than it's a blood product, and they think in an autoimmune process that it sort of tricks your body to stop attacking itself and to start attacking the new foreign substance. That's what they told me. But I actually had a really terrible reaction to them and had to stop because the doctor was concerned that I could be developing Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which is where your body kind of burns from the inside out.
Yes, I'm familiar with that one. Yes.
So again, I was, sort of left very uncomforted by what, the treatment of this looked like. And I actually really love the neurologist that I saw and respect him a lot. But, what he could offer in terms of treatment and support was actually very limited. We stopped the treatment, and he said, you're probably going to get mostly better. You might deal with some of these residual things the rest of your life. You need to start physical therapy. And when I asked him, is there anything I could do nutritionally, like any supplements I need to be on? Is there anything that you have so many years of experience that would be helpful in this? Because it's super painful. Guillain Barre Syndrome is extremely painful. And so he basically said, B vitamins would be really helpful, and I can give you some pain medicine. And that's really all I can suggest. And so it was a very lackluster experience, and that's sort of what opened my eyes to see that, while medicine is amazing, there are very real limitations inside of chronic disease, and there's not very many options. And so I kind of left there still very sick, still not able to walk, not really able to do much of anything. Because with that syndrome specifically, all the nerves in your body are like electrical cords. And with GBS, the outer part of the cord that produces the current starts to deteriorate. And so it was described to me like having, if you look at an electrical cord, the outer part of that cord being chewed through, but it's widespread. So even when your brain is telling your body to move and do something, it's not responding, and it's because the signal just isn't being transmitted all the way through. And so in total, I was in a wheelchair for about a year, a little under a year. And then I was in physical therapy for 2.5 years, like 3 days a week. And I had to relearn how to do everything. So
you're young. You're in your 20s?
Yeah, I was 20. So 13 years ago, I'm 36. I was 23.
Wow. Yes.
And so, whenever he told me, you're probably going to deal with this forever. Yeah. There was just this tenacity in me, and I'm stubborn and, West Texan. And I just thought, there's no way I'm going to deal with this. There was just this thing inside of me that said, absolutely not. Like, this is not going to be my life.
Wow. No. In a wheelchair and hardly able to walk. So, okay. So you're at that point.
Yes. So I leave and I'm, in physical therapy and still just, kind of looking at the day-to-day of what that sort of illness looks like is very hard. And I just, asked the Lord, I was like, you have to hold my hand through this. You have to show me the way. You have to pave the way. I don't know what to do. The doctor, the experts here are not super helpful. And I just felt like, okay, like I'm on my own. I have to figure this out. Yeah. And that is whenever I came across Dr. Terry Wall's TED Talk. And she was a physician with MS. And at the point of the peak of her illness, she was in a zero gravity wheelchair and she'd completely reversed it. And so she had written a book and, all these things. And I just thought, well, if it's good enough for MS, this is a very similar process. It's not the same, but surely this would be helpful to be in my journey. So I started implementing those principles, which was mostly like a paleo anti-inflammatory style of eating. And I did that for, probably 10 years. And it took 7 years for me to actually feel normal again, like where I could exercise, like for enjoyment and for the challenge, not for function, like before in those 7 years, I would go to the gym and it'd be like, we're going to walk up an incline because my balance is still terrible. Or, it was very, very much still connecting to some of the issues that I was experiencing. But it took me like 7 years to kind of, and just feel like the pain was not a daily part of my life. So, that was my first rodeo. And I had children in that time. And
Oh my God! So while you had this going on, you conceived and had children, or you had them before your diagnosis?
I had them after I'd gotten out of the wheelchair, and it had been like 2 to 3 months of walking without assistance, and I was pregnant with my first son. So I was still very much in the throes of it all. Having my son, and then with each pregnancy, I actually went through a period of what they would call like a relapse of symptoms. So I think the stress on my body was a lot. Yeah. And so postpartum, I still had to go see my neurologist during my pregnancies and then after my pregnancies, just to make sure we were good.
So you were pregnant with your first child. You had a bit of a relapse. You had some postpartum issues. Now, I do want to ask you, so your neurologist had mentioned B vitamins. Did you focus on B vitamins and getting those? I know you said you did the paleo anti-inflammatory diet, but what about your B vitamins?
Yes. So I did start a B complex, but I don't know. I just didn't, sometimes you take stuff and you're like, is this doing anything? I don't know if it is. That's sort of how I felt.
Yeah. And we tried, if you're like me, you try so many things and you're like, I don't know which one of these helped and which one didn't or what's working. So.
Yes. I mean, he could have told me to drink tar and I probably would have drank it if it would have helped.
Yeah.
But you do the things and then you're like, yeah, that's actually not super helpful. Or I can't tell a difference. So.
Right. Okay, so that's your first rodeo, and you kind of got stable enough. You were functioning, pretty high functioning.
Yes. I would say, 10 years after, I was kind of walking in my second life of feeling very invincible. I, conquered this really terrible thing and, didn't really have any physical reminders of what had happened.
That's amazing.
At that time, which was a miracle. It really was a miracle.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's quite a feat to overcome that. So now your second rodeo, how many years later? And that must have come as somewhat of a surprise as you had already conquered this one bull ride. And now your diet was pretty sound nutritionally, right?
Oh my goodness. Yes. By all definitions in the health community, I did everything right.
Yeah.
It was very therapeutic, very intentional, but at the same time, it was also it was very restrictive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, what had happened was this was 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. I'd had a couple viral infections that were kind of back to back. And after that had happened, it was just kind of like my body didn't rebound super well. And again, by definition, I'd done everything right. So it was very odd to now feel like, why was that? Why does my body feel different?
Yes.
And what would happen was I would not get enough sleep, and then I would feel feverish, and then would kind of run like a low fever and would not have an infection. I had joint pain, and then I felt I felt inflamed, and I was very tired. And those were the symptoms that I was dealing with. But then also, whenever I was feeling kind of feverish and run down like that, I would get this flushing rash on my cheeks and would have like this redness. And my mom is actually in family practice medicine. And so she was like, you need to come in. Let's just check you out and see what's going on, And so she is a very thorough person, and I call her, the detective, because if there's something up, she will figure it out. I do have a history of GBS, and she just thought, well, we just need to check. We just need to check and see what's going on. And it was similar in like the tiredness, the inflammation, and in that, but nerve pain is very different from joint pain.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of leading me to think that maybe this was not GBS. And so whenever she did a very thorough lab run on me, I'd given a ton of blood. And when it came back, I was positive for lupus. And then it was positive for autoimmunity. And that was such a shock because I had done everything technically that was what you're supposed to do for autoimmune things. And here I was sitting in a new autoimmune storm.
Yes.
And I really just didn't know where to go from there because I was already kind of doing it. I was like, where do we shift from here? Because I've already do all the things. And I was grain free for most of the time inside of those 10 years, outside of sourdough and some sprouted rice periodically. I had not been on any processed sugar for years, almost the entire time, outside of, going to a birthday party or something. And there was ice cream or something.
Very exceptional.
Yes. And so I was just kind of searching and, I thought, like, do I juice? Do I do carnivore? Like, what is next? And I just prayed and asked the Lord to teach me and show me the way again, because I've gotten out of this before and I fully trust that He will show me what I need to do. And this is where I came across your video on YouTube. And I was not searching for it, so it just came up on my feed. I was not researching anything about bread. I was not looking into anything about bread. At that time, bread was still so not a part of my life at all that I have no idea how I stumbled on it. I personally think it was the Lord, but
it was too. How many coincidence things that would just happen to stumble on. And you're talking about the only real bread is the Staff of Life video.
Yes, it was that one. And so I thought, okay, like I can drink celery juice every day, or I could eat some bread. And honestly, bread sounds way better. And
not that celery juice is bad, but you can't live off of it. You can't. It's not sustainable. It's not something you're going to just look forward to every day.
I will tell you, my children do not wake up in the morning and think, I would love for you to make me a glass of celery juice. But they do wake up and say, I would love a piece of toast. So I had a Vitamix and I went to Natural Grocers and I bought a little bag of grain and I froze the berries and used my Vitamix to kind of chop it up, which is so not the way to do it. After you have a meal, you're like, oh, this is terrible.
Right.
But I just thought, we'll start somewhere and I'll try this out. So I just started eating a little bit every day. And I thought, well, I have nothing to lose. I've tried everything else. We'll eat some bread. So that's kind of what started me fresh milling.
Oh, that's amazing. Especially after being grain free for so long.
Yes. And my family could not believe that I was baking bread in my kitchen. They were like,
what?
Who are you? I was a recipe developer in this time for health food companies from all the experience I had from baking with all of these weird flours.
Right.
And all the restrictions, so they would be like, we need a gluten-free, dairy-free, refined sugar-free, which really just means fun-free, dessert for Christmas and make it green with natural coloring. And we need 10 photos and a video and all this stuff. And so I did that forever. So I was always making stuff, but it was always, you're using weird ingredients and weird flours. And so whenever bread came in, they were like, what is this?
Yes. This is delicious. So, so you started eating some bread every day. how long to see results, or what happened? What did you see?
Well, the first thing I noticed was that the bread didn't make me feel bad. So historically, whenever I had eaten even sourdough, organic sourdough, it would just sort of sit in my stomach like a brick, and I didn't feel great when I ate it, even though everything you read is sourdough, sourdough is great, it's wonderful, it's healthy, all this stuff. And I just was not experiencing the vitality of that in my life. I still kind of felt bad, but I noticed that I didn't have any bloating. I didn't have a foggy brain. It didn't make me sleepy.
You mean once you started milling?
Mm-hmm.
Once you started making your own bread from freshly milled flour. So no bloating, no foggy brain, didn't make you feel sleepy. Wow.
No. Yes. And I just started noticing that I was having more good days than bad days, like where I didn't feel as tired. I didn't feel as inflamed. I didn't have as much pain. And I went back 9 months later to get my labs redrawn and retested. And the autoimmunity was completely gone. The labs that were consistent with lupus were completely clear, and it was totally erased from my blood work.
Wow. So you had a medical test to prove that you had completely reversed this.
Yes, that is accurate. They say when you have lupus, you always have lupus, and you can go through periods of remission, but those labs would still remain positive.
Right.
They would just maybe go into a low positive, and I had no trace whatsoever on my labs at all.
That is amazing. We actually have a testimony on a very old video that we did 20 years ago. Same thing. And the lady was a nurse, and she experienced the same thing. She was a little older, much older than you, and she was like where she needed something at the store. Her husband would have to drop her off the door. She would walk in, get the one thing, come out, he'd pick her up. And in a matter of a few months later, when she started real food and then milling and making her bread, I think it was under 6 months, she did 7 amusement parks in Florida with her family.
Wow. What a way to celebrate.
Yes, what a way to celebrate. I mean, she said, I went from hardly being able to walk, with the energy. Wasn't that she physically couldn't, but just the energy to being able to do amusement parks, and those wear me out.
Yes, that is incredible, and I totally believe it.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to see the results from the time of diagnosis to you saw no trace of it at all?
9 months was the timeline. It was 9 months.
Wow. And she said the same thing. She had all the blood work, said lupus. She went back, no trace. That is absolutely amazing.
I completely agree. And it's funny to sit in this place, because it's such a paradox. You have the health community that's, wheat is terrible.
Yeah.
You have an autoimmune condition. The first thing they say to eliminate is wheat. And then you have the medical side that's like autoimmunity is incurable. It's something you have forever. It's impossible to heal.
That's what we're told.
And then I just kind of sit in the middle, like I don't fit into any of these boxes.
Yeah. Wow. That is absolutely amazing. Just amazing. What a story, Michal. And I know it's going to encourage everyone that hears. So, all right. So tell us a few things that you love about milling, because you obviously love cooking and baking. You were making all these recipes. So what do you love about milling your own flour, and what has it done for the rest of your family? Have they, besides they love it?
Yes. Okay. So I'll start with my family's testimonies. My husband, he'd had psoriasis and years of kind of dealing with these little spots. And we'd been eating this bread for a long time. And I just thought to ask him, hey, do you still have psoriasis? Because he hadn't said anything to me about it. I hadn't noticed. And he was, kind of inspected himself and was like, actually, no, I haven't had a spot in like a really long time. And, the spots that he had were completely gone. And so he had been dealing with joint pain as well. And I just asked, do your joints still hurt? And he was like, not really. No, like, I don't even notice it. And before this, it was something we talked about pretty often because he's very athletic and very physical, exercises a lot and uses his body a lot. So that was something that he had major awareness of, I guess. And then kind of noticed that he wasn't aware of that anymore.
I think when you're physically active like that and you just live with it, you just deal with it. You're like, I'm not letting this hold me back, that you have this lifestyle. And then all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, I don't hurt anymore. Or, or like, wait a minute, I don't have those spots anymore of, skin and psoriasis. We have a lot of psoriasis testimonies. That's amazing.
Wow.
And that just goes away in a matter of months. And I'm so glad you mentioned the joint pain, because everybody everywhere thinks wheat is inflammatory and that they have to give it up to combat their joint pain. And it's just not true. It's just not true at all.
Yes, we have definitely lived the opposite of that belief. My son, he actually had warts. We were a wart story as well. Which I wonder if you ever get tired of telling the wart stories.
No, I don't, because it's amazing. It's so real.
But he had them in his hairline. He was a wrestler. And, you're dealing with all kinds of weird skin stuff with wrestling.
Yep. And sweaty bodies and, yeah.
Yes. And so he had gotten warts, but they were in his hairline. And we were treating them topically. The topical stuff did not touch it, did not work. He ate very healthy. So again, I was just sort of like, well, we'll see if the bread helps. I mean, he was not eating a lot every day. So I would make him take a bite every day, kind of move on with life. And I was just thought, well, we'll see. And over a period of time, they just disappeared. One day I just was like, hey, let me check your hair. Let me see if you still have those. And he goes, oh, no, those have been gone for a while.
Oh, my goodness. I love it. That is so great. That is so great.
Yes. And then my daughter, she had on her scalp, it wasn't cradle cap, but she sort of just had this, from what I can guess, maybe it was some sort of candida overgrowth or something on her scalp. Some sort of fungal thing on her scalp that I just could not. I treated it, done things to help her naturally and, both ways, could not really shake it. And after she had started eating this bread, I was, washing her hair and I just kind of noticed that it was going away. And then over time, it was completely gone.
That's amazing. And that's I'm so glad you brought that up, because another thing people say, oh, I've got candida overgrowth, I can't eat this bread. And they don't understand that the yeast that we make bread with is actually a good yeast organism. And then there's pathogenic yeast organism. And it actually combats, of course the yeast is dead, but they get it in their mind that bread feeds that. And that's the stuff in the store, yes, but not real whole grains. And that,
yes,
you brought that up.
I completely agree. Both of them also, what I noticed was they just didn't seem to catch every cough and cold anymore.
Yep, that's what we saw too.
It was kind of bizarre. They just had longer periods of health where we weren't dealing with runny noses or coughs. And when they would catch something, it just seemed so mild and they would rebound way quicker. And that sort of puzzled me as well, because I thought, their nutrition was also really great. And I always wondered, like, why do these little bugs hit them so hard? And I think we were just missing some things, that bread definitely filled in the gaps for us.
Yeah. So like you, we were eating, not perfect, of course, but predominantly real food. We ate at home. We rarely ate out. Even when we did go, we would make the healthiest choices. And we weren't a sickly lot, but just like you, they would catch everything that went around, from church or baseball or wherever, and it just would linger. And then, boom, we put that bread in there, the missing piece of the puzzle, I say. And it was like everything changed. We did not catch it everything that came around. We got over, my children would get over whatever they caught from someone faster than the person they caught it from, and that's what we began to notice too. So very similar testimonies and stories.
Yes, I completely believe it. It has changed our life. And I would say in general, not just our physical well-being, but our emotional well-being, like how hard it is to feed your family when they're not eating bread, and how hard it is even yourself to, find nutrition for yourself and not be eating bread.
Yeah.
And so whenever bread came back in, everyone was so happy to eat it. And everyone is still very happy. Anything that I make, they love it. And so it just kind of opened up a new door for us to have more fun in our kitchen and to make things that we'd missed out on for years because of, using almond flour and, all these other weird things.
They're just not the same. It's just
not the same.
It's expensive.
It is. It is expensive. Yeah, that's it. That's another part of it is it's really expensive to feed your family that way.
Yes, alternative and restrictive diets, they're expensive. And, and it doesn't taste that great, whereas the bread is so economical. And I do a whole visual teaching. You can make a dozen muffins for less than a box of cereal, and that box of cereal, 2 children could eat all of it, and still not be full and satisfied, and it not be giving them any nutritional value. That's what I found, that it was so much more economical. And I remember some years ago when this whole anti-grain, anti-gluten, anti-wheat stuff came out, I actually heard a doctor teach, and he said, wheat is the easiest thing to give up. I'm like, I don't know what planet you are on, but it is not, easy to give up and to live without. And we shouldn't. Jesus compared himself to bread. He compared himself to a kernel of wheat, and the biblical feasts are around the wheat harvest. I'm like, I don't think we're supposed to give it up. I think we're supposed to get back to eating it the way God made it. So I'm just so happy I've had the opportunity to meet you and now hear your story firsthand. What an amazing journey. What significant rodeos you have certainly been on. I love that. And you've just gotten back up and you keep going. So I always like to give my guests a chance to just leave our listeners with a final word of encouragement, something that maybe would help them on their health and real bread journey. Just anything the Lord brings to your mind, whatever you would like to just share and leave with our listeners today.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really contribute a lot of the path that we are on now to finding your video on YouTube and the message that you share as well. And, it kind of opened a door for me as well to naturally start being in this realm of sharing recipes as well, because I'm very passionate about it as well. It's changed our life. And I would say, after everything that I have been through, that if you are struggling with a chronic condition, to keep fighting for your health. Mm-hmm. And it's hard, but you have to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you have to keep going because the answers are out there. And I would just encourage you to invite the Lord into that journey and ask for guidance, because he never left me in my low places and he always showed me a way. And I think that's available to anyone that asks for it.
Absolutely. He promises that he will. He says if we lack wisdom to ask, and he gives without fault finding or any partiality or prejudice. So don't think something's going to keep you from God pouring out his love and wisdom. You have been such an inspiration today and a testimony to God's goodness and his pathway for healing. And what a journey, Michal. Just thank you for taking the time to tell your story. I know that it's going to bring great hope to everyone that listens. And I just want to say to you, to encourage you, you never know how many lives you may have touched today in a powerful way by just sharing your story. Our testimonies are powerful. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to share your story, your rodeos with us. And as always, to everyone listening today, I want to thank you for listening. And until next time, this is Sue Becker from Bread Beckers with Sue's Healthy Minutes.
Sue's Healthy Minutes podcast has been a presentation by the Bread Beckers Incorporated, located in Woodstock, Georgia. For more information, store hours, and learning opportunities, visit breadbeckers.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Share this with 2 friends who would benefit from this information, and be sure to join us again next week for more of Sue's Healthy Minutes.